Hey guys, welcome to Jerry's Live. As always, I'm your host, Amy Gardner-Dean, and today's episode is JL40, Canvas Education 101.
JL 140.
What did I say, JL40?
Whoa.
Yeah, okay, it's been a long day. So JL 140, thank you, Frida. What is the right surface for me in Canvas? Because it's something that people always want to know about. It's something that takes time if you don't have an educational program like this to refer to read a lot of product descriptions and all that. So we're kind of like basically doing the short sheet list for you here by going over styles of canvases and what type of an artist those are appropriate for. So, all right. So we are going to get started with Canvas education. Just very briefly, because this is something that although everybody's painted on a canvas, not all of you painters actually know what it's made out of or understand what canvas weights mean, things like that. So let's demystify a little bit of that to start out before we actually get to looking at different types and styles of canvas and help you find what's appropriate for you. Canvas basically comes from the Latin word, the vulgar Latin word, canapacious, meaning made of hemp, because that's what the original canvases were made out of. Modern production canvases, however, cotton or linen. Once in a while you get some hemp, maybe some polyflax, but that's more what the kind of common modern materials are. Canvas became a painting surface that started being used in the 14th century, but did not become commonplace until the 16th or 17th century in Europe. So pop quiz, one of the oldest surviving works on canvas is what? It's a Botticelli work, 5 points, and just like whose line is it anyway, points don't matter. But I will give 5 points to whatever viewer can. We'll come back to that after we talk about the materials. So if they give their information, we'll see. It's a Botticelli painting, and everybody should have seen this one, I'm sure. So canvas is classified in several ways. So one of them is by weight, and it's the most common, and it's what you're going to find on stretched canvases, which is what we're talking about today. It measures the ounces per yard, or if you're in the metric system, grams per square meter. So that means a 3 foot by 3 foot size canvas piece, right? That's what you're determining. If somebody says it's a 15 ounce canvas, that's what that means. Now there's primed and unprimed. If you've got a stretched canvas and it's primed, clearly that's going to be the primed weight. Sometimes they'll be tricky, just so you know that maybe it's a heavier canvas. They'll say it's an 11 ounce unprimed weight, 15 ounce primed weight. That's just letting you know that it's a more substantial material before it's primed, okay? Because you can take a surface, add extra priming, and it makes it sound, much beefier when maybe it's not. So that's how you determine kind of what that means looking at one canvas versus another canvas versus another canvas, that ounce per yard. Then another one, which if you're buying rolls or cotton blankets, it's usually mostly used in cotton blankets, and it's almost always just set aside for like the duck. If everybody's ever heard of the cotton canvas duck blankets, right? They do those by a graded number system, and the numbers run in reverse. So the higher the number, the lighter the weight canvas, which makes absolutely no sense. But if you learn anything here and you buy blanket canvas, just remember the higher the number, the lighter the weight. The lower the number, the higher the weight. Just think opposite and you'll have it. All right, so cotton versus linen. This is what the basic breakdown is of those two materials. Has anybody said the Botticelli thing yet?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What's the
Angela
answer?
Grattan said The Birth of Venus.
Woo woo, 1480s. Angela, 5 points for you. We should just keep a tally, and at the end of the year, be like, so-and-so has the most points. Good job, Angela. All right, so cotton. Cotton is a great material for canvases as long as you know what you're getting into. It's inexpensive. It takes less processing to harvest the plant, to clean the plant, to manufacture the plant. Therefore, for the pocketbook, it's going to be a lot more reasonable, especially if you're starting out. The shorter fibers on cotton as a whole make the canvas softer. It makes it easier to get even when they're stretching it. It produces a very mechanical tight weave, just like fabric. You don't see lumps and bumps and things like that on a cotton t-shirt. If you have a linen shirt, there's always kind of those irregular strands that go through it. It's because cotton has very short, the fibers are very similar across the board. So it makes it so you can get, if you like a tight mechanical look to a canvas so that it's very smooth, it's very even, no bumps and lumps, cotton is going to be your surface. It's easier to re-stretch or re-key. That means if you've got this canvas that's been sitting around for a while over time, especially if it's large, it may start to get slack, where you'll kind of have a little bit of that wiggle, that kind of bung, bung, bung when you hit the thing. Well, it makes a sound, right? It does. It's slack canvas makes a sound. If you're a painter, you know. Cotton has the beauty of, because cotton does what when it gets hot in the washer? Favorite shirt or jeans?
Shrinks.
Yes. So you can actually take that cotton canvas, lay it on a flat surface with a towel, take a tea kettle of water, either put it in a sprayer or actually paint it on out of a cup, and that hot water will seep into the fabric, and as it dries, go tighten it right up. Right? You can do that with cotton. You cannot do that with linen, because linen is not that same kind of fiber. It does not shrink. So that's another thing. If you're in an area where you know you have really humid climate and then really dry climate, and your canvases go here and there, that's something that you can actually do with cotton that you're not going to be able to do with linen. Okay? Linen, on the other kind of end of that spectrum, is the world's strongest natural fiber. It's so durable that it's used in paper money to increase the strength. 30% of the money in your pocket, or I mean not 30%, but it's used in paper to increase strength. It's actually 30% stronger than cotton. So the same piece of fabric, size, made with cotton, made with linen, it's going to be that much stronger in linen. That's why when you look at linen canvases, especially if they're not primed, you will see that the ounce weight is lower than cotton. It's because it's way stronger, it's way more durable. It will hold up to heavier loads than cotton will, and it doesn't stretch. Yes, Frida.
In regards to cotton, and using the boiling water to shrink it back up, what if you've already painted or primed that surface?
Okay, primed, it will still shrink some. Painting sometimes, especially with acrylics, as acrylics dry, unless they're like super the highest quality acrylics, and even then all acrylics shrink just a tiny bit. It's just what the nature of them, it's what they do. So as you paint on a slack canvas with acrylic, it will tighten up. That's how sometimes you can look at the back of a canvas and you've used mediums on the lowest layers in only one area. You can see this weird, almost like an embossed surface through it on the back of the canvas. That's because of the shrinkage of the acrylic. But once it's painted, it's a lot harder to do that with. I would be very careful. That's really when you want to use your keys, because you sure hate to damage, you know, especially with heat and things like that, your painting. So better to do before. You could always mist it gently with just a little water and see if it helps some, but keys are definitely the way to go with the canvas already painted on. Okay, let me see where I was on linen. Linen is made from the fiber from the flax plant. So flax gives you flaxseed, like linseed oil, right? And then it gives you the actual materials to make linen. The plant is thicker than cotton. The fiber has variable lengths, most of which are very long, which that's what contributes to the strength, versus cotton being made out of very short fiber material. Linen gains strength when it's wet, and it also has the natural ability to prevent bacteria growth. So if you live in an area where Maybe you have maybe a studio that's not climate controlled, and you're in a place like South Georgia or Florida or Alabama along the coast, or Louisiana, anywhere where you've got a lot of humidity going on at different times of the year. Linen may be the safer material to have in your studio, just because if you've ever had a cotton canvas get moldy or mildewy, there's just that once that damage starts, it's not really good to keep that around. So linen is very good at resisting that growth. Natural oils that are left in the plant itself keep the fabric more flexible over time. That's why we've got things like Botticelli's Birth of Venus that's been around since the late 1400s. Okay? Linen takes a lot more time and labor to produce, to make the yarn for the canvas. So that adds to that cost, but it also uses less water and chemicals to cultivate the plant. So it's environmentally friendly in that way. The best linens, everybody always says Belgium linen, Belgium linen. And then there's also linen from France. There's a reason for that. Their climate and their soil is ideal for the plant. It's cooler. It helps control. Actually, when they take the plant, they pull it. They don't cut it. So they pull it in the field and they actually leave it there for a short while to begin to start into the decomposition process, because it makes those fibers softer before they harvest it. If you're in a rainy climate where once you pull it and set it down, it starts getting really nasty, obviously that wouldn't be the place to have linen. So France and Belgium are ideal for growing the actual flax plant. So that's going to be your differences between the two main materials and why there's that cost difference. But perhaps in the situation you may be in, one may be more suitable to you than the other. So now you have a little bit of information on what is going to work best for you. Okay, so we go from those materials that those are made out of, and then we're going to start talking about the actual canvas itself, the construction of the canvas. Everything around you that you see on this table is a canvas. Some of them are put together very differently. There's different reasons for that, but some are going to give you some extended options beyond what they're made from. So let's talk about that. Okay, so when you stretch a canvas, you've got a frame. I'm just going to use this to show. Frame with no canvas, right? We'll talk about this one at the end because this is kind of the weird, like, abominable snowman kind of, it exists, but you got to hunt for it kind of thing. You got your frame. There's different ways that if you're not stretching it yourself, other people have done the legwork for you. There's back stapled, where they take that, they fold the corners, they actually bring it around the back and staple the material on. There's tacked edges or back, which they've done it a little bit differently. You may have edges like this, where it's got the tacks in the side, and then they've done an alternate method around the back just to give you a little bit extra to stretch with. There's also splined. If you've ever put new screening on a door, you know what splined is. It's actually where there is a groove cut out of the back of the canvas, and when we get to the edge canvas, that's like our classic one that has a spline. They've got a groove dug out on the back of that stretcher. The canvas is pushed in there, and they actually put a rubberized spline in there. It keeps it really nice and tight, and it's just kind of a different answer to the same problem, right, that all the canvases have. So we'll talk about, when we talk about these different canvases, why some of these are done very specifically different than others. So, so a stretcher strip, when you've got your stretcher strip, so this has an edge, right? So you've got your edge of your canvas. This is the depth, right? Front to back is the depth. When something is 3/4 inches deep, it's 3/4 from the front of your painting to the back. 1.5 inches, 2.5 inches, whatever. Anytime they refer to the depth, that's what they're talking about. When they talk about the bead on a canvas stretcher, they're talking about this edge. It's raised. Not all are. Some of the, especially if you go to a craft store and buy canvas, a lot of times they don't have that. So that's something that can be an issue. This drops away very obviously. You can see the shadow in this right here, right? that drops away very quickly, because the reason you want that bead and that to drop away is when this canvas is over it. If you're an active painter like I am, which that's a way of saying rough and sounding more positive, it keeps that canvas from pushing repeatedly over that bead and against wood that may be under here if this doesn't drop away as far, okay? It's called ghosting when that happens. You'll actually see, it's like the paint sticks to it, but not all the way. It's a very strange phenomenon that until it's happened to you, it's like ghosts. Either you believe or you don't believe. So that term is something that probably if you've painted on enough canvases, you've experienced once or twice before. And the issue with that is that can, over time, wear enough where it can erode some of your painting away after it's a finished product. So it's something that you should be aware of and kind of read the directions or the description on canvas when you buy it to know if it's got a bead and you know what that's about. And a lot of them, they will show a profile, which means the stretcher bar turned towards you, cut. It's what that looks like if you were to cut that canvas in half and see that. So that gives you additional information for, is this something that's quality, okay? So those are things that are important. Warping and knots. The lower the quality of stretcher, especially on craft style canvases, if you can see any of the wood in the back, you'll see knots and things like that. That can lead to warping or twisting over time because it's not a clean piece of wood that's structurally sound. Okay, so that's something that if you're looking at canvases, especially discount canvases, check that. That's kind of an indicator of knowing they've skimped on this, so they've probably skimped on some other things, okay? Then we can talk about, okay, additional depth. Larger you go, like this, the deeper you want this to be, because it's going to increase the strength in it not twisting. And with me doing this, I'm actually squeaking on my shoes because I can't twist it. If this was thin, like a 3/4 inch, even if it was braced, you would be able to move it, which means that that's not the size structurally for that frame that's going to be really good long term, unless you're going to put it in a very big heavy frame and secure it well. Then that does help. But especially if you don't want to have to buy a frame to exhibit in, it's going to need to be deeper, and it's only going to help you have a more structurally sound canvas. The larger it is, the more braces that you want to expect. If something is 24 by 36 and above and it doesn't have at least one single brace in it, that's telling me. I don't care even if it's 2 inches deep, it still needs to have a brace, because as you work on it, as your easel has kind of pushed down on it, that can actually torque that canvas out of place. So let's start looking at some of these different canvases in a second. We've had a lot of questions on the show before in comments where people have talked about priming and buying canvases and then how many coats of gesso do I put on it. If you're not buying something unprimed, which we only sell one stretch canvas that seems unprimed, but it's actually primed with a clear primer, you don't need to be regessoing. The only event that you want to do that is, again, if it's like a craft store style canvas where it's not very durable in the first place, and maybe the gesso is just too powdery, it's not thick enough, whatever. But keep in mind too, they've probably made it that way so that it doesn't start looking slack, because the more that weight you add with gesso over and over, the more slack that can potentially become. So you don't, unless there's a custom finish you want on your canvas, you do not need to regesso. I'm not sure what episode it was that we did. We talked about priming surfaces. If you want to regesso your canvases, please watch that episode. At the top of your description for this show, whether you're watching on a Facebook or YouTube, you can hit the show more. It gives the description, the full description. Then it has 2 different documents that it links to. One is all of our shows in chronological order. The other one is by topic. One of the topics in there discusses priming. Please watch how we actually showed 2 add more primer to a canvas, because if you do it correctly, you can customize the finish to your liking. Some canvases are a little drier, you might not like that. Some canvases are more slick and you might not like that. Yes, Amanda.
I believe it's JL87, substrate preparation, how to prepare canvas, paper, panels, etc.
That would be it. Thank you, Amanda. JL87. So watch that before you just go ahead and prime more canvases, because that will really help you. If you want to add that on, do it the most appropriately where you may not have issues afterwards. Everybody always wants to, the thicker the better, they think. Like painting a room, you don't want to do that, because that can actually, with gesso, because there's a little bit of marble dust in it, that can actually potentially crack off and not bond properly if it's applied wrong, okay? So again, might be a good episode to watch if that's something that you really do want to do. All right, so acrylic gesso, when they talk about a universal primed canvas, what they're talking about is an acrylic-based gesso preparation, okay? Formulations for different grades of canvases, from just like a paint and sip variety canvas to a professional one, are going to be formulated very differently. Also, the nice thing about a universal prime canvas, I guess, for most people, even if you're a professional artist, is if you work in multiple mediums, like you do acrylics and you do oils, you might do some other types, that you might work in inks, you might work in a bunch of different things. If you unwrap your canvases and take those handy little labels off and you store them somewhere, and you bought oil and acrylic prime canvases, suddenly, unless you've got a really sensitive snooter, you're not going to know which one was which. And you might put acrylic on something that's oil, and that can peel right off later on, okay? So if you work in multiple mediums, it may just be better to play it safe and do universal primed canvases, or very carefully mark all your canvases for which ones they are, okay? Just something to think about. That universal priming will take everything. Acrylic gouaches, inks, oils, traditional oils, water mixable oils, alkyds, the whole 9 yards. So it's a good all-purpose priming, okay? Acrylic priming bonds best with acrylics, okay? It's just how it is, especially if it's a very slick type of a priming. That will work the best with acrylics itself. Okay, and surfaces can vary. Even at different price and quality levels, some manufacturers prefer it to be kind of a little dustier, more absorbent. There's a reason for that, because they think it provides a better bond with whatever paint you're going to be applying, okay, for your first layers. Some like it a little slicker. It looks prettier. People want to use it straight out of the package rather than feeling like they need to apply more. So it's going to depend on that formulation. As we've discussed on other shows, plastic does leave some residue on any type of canvas, whether it's oil or acrylic primed, as well as even some of the, just a little bit of adhesive on the paper, tags or whatever. Highest percentage of isopropyl alcohol, you can wipe that down with that. Even denatured alcohol, and that can help you clean off any residue from the plastics, fingerprints with touching it from unwrapping it, or everybody wants to rub that smooth canvas, but then you're depositing hand oils on there and you might have problems with your materials adhering. It's a good idea to wipe that down. That will help give you the best bond for when you do start to paint. Okay, so oil priming. Oil priming that's done in like a production environment from a manufacturer is most likely going to be done over rabbit skin glue. I think there may be a couple people that now have switched to a PVA glue, which is like a resin based instead of a natural based. What it is it's a barrier coat, right? Rabbit skin glue is just a barrier. You're putting something on that canvas to absorb in, to keep the oil from touching your canvas itself, because oil is acidic by nature. It will slowly eat your fabric of choice, whether cotton or linen, if it's not properly protected, okay? So that's the only reason that they do that. They put that on there as a protective barrier. then they put the primer on top of it. So most oil priming is done over rabbit skin glue, okay, which is just refined rabbit collagen. So the weird, yes.
When you, I have two questions.
Sure.
First, you mentioned wiping down the canvas with
Yes.
the alcohol.
Yes.
What do you usually use to put the alcohol on?
A soft lint-free rag. Best thing to do when you're getting rid of old t-shirts that have gotten those hideous armpit holes, we all have, or you know, lost weight, keep all your t-shirts, keep the white ones, the ones that don't have dye in them. Use those because cotton does not usually leave any residue on it, and it's porous. It holds the liquid, but it doesn't, like, it's not like a sponge where it just squirts it all over. That's one of the easiest things to do, to use. What's the second
And
question?
to jump back to acrylic priming, gesso, does it have a shelf life?
It's really going to depend. It's going to depend on whether you gesso. She asked if gesso has a shelf life, and if you don't have a climate-controlled studio, it may. If you've opened it and closed it, using it a lot, because you've got a jar of it open, right, while you're working, it may take you 30 or 40 minutes to prime a big canvas. Each time more of that air gets in there, it starts to age the resins, right? So under those type of conditions, yes, it can start getting, if you've ever opened a jar of older gesso and it's like, as pudding is starting to set up, right? Instant pudding, suddenly it becomes like sludgy. You can sometimes add a little bit of water to help thin it, but there gets to be a point where sometimes it's better just to buy new gesso. And if it starts to smell and it's acrylic, throw it out. Just common sense. Okay, so let's go back to the rabbit skin glue to understand a little bit of that barrier under oil priming. It's hydroscopic, okay? It means it's continually absorbing moisture from the atmosphere. So if it's humid, it pulls in moisture and it swells, right? So suddenly your canvas gets beautifully tight, just like perfect. And then as it gets dry again, then it all just kind of goes back, right? So tight when it's humid, looser, you know, you've got that expansion and contraction, like if you've got old wood floors that haven't been sealed in a long time, right? In the winter, the lines between the wood's wider if you have an old house. Don't ask me how I know that. So that's something that if you, you know, that you may want to consider. So that will happen with your canvases. And if you buy oil prime linen and you want to stretch it yourself, be very aware of what the weather is like when you're actually stretching it, because if it's super humid and you don't do it very tight, when it's drier, suddenly that's going to be even more slack. All right. Oil priming, it can vary in composition. Everybody kind of knows that zinc isn't as good of a thing anymore, doing it all in zinc. So all manufacturers have either switched to zinc free or they're using some titanium in that. The reason is that zinc is a very brittle pigment. Now, if the oil that they're using in that primer is something that's a more brittle oil, that's kind of a double not so great thing, but they've usually paired it with linseed, so it's still got some flex to it. Nowadays, they're very aware of the problem. I mean, that's been, what, the last 10 years that's been a really big thing, Katie? Don't you think, with the zinc priming? It seems like everybody has rolled with the punches and has changed their ways on that. So buying modern oil primed canvas, I don't think is as big of a deal as it once was. So, and that's manufacturer dependent. Again, this is why you read the descriptions of the products when you go to buy them, so you can educate yourself on all of those facets. So if you're an oil painter, really oil priming is best. I understand that that's more expensive. It's not a must, but especially if you're painting at a higher level, you're commanding higher prices for your work, you're going to actually use, I've played with cotton canvas, with acrylic primer and oil primed canvas that's linen. You use literally half the paint, because instead of soaking in and having that dull sinking where you keep having to add layers to really get the brightness, or either a lot of oil, which isn't necessarily good either. The paint sits immediately right on that surface, produces a very nice bond. It already has that kind of depth and luminescence that oil paint is something that, that's the hallmark of that medium. So if that's something where you've got money coming in from doing art stuff, it is something that you may want to consider trying if you haven't before. It's not a must, but again, and there's things like oil prime panels and stuff like that you can try that are very inexpensive, that are a good way to kind of like a gateway thing to make sure that try it, see if it's right for you, that you can really see what the big difference is. And sometimes it's just really worth the money. You gonna be okay over there, Kate? I was afraid you hadn't had enough coffee and just kind of face planted. Yeah.
Close.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's get into looking at some of these canvases and seeing that, yes, one more question.
Before we do
back
that.
Back it up.
Test Track was asking for some guidance on when to use linen versus cotton. Are there any hard and fast rules to always follow, or does it just depend on your personal style and medium?
It's got a lot to do with your personality, and again, like I was just saying, who's the client that you're looking to do work for? How large is the work? Linen is much more structurally strong in a really large piece. Unless you're using some super heavy cotton, it can hold weight up from heavier paint applications, or just, a lot of heavy glazing techniques and stuff like that, and be lighter. A cotton canvas that's heavy duty enough to hold a lot of heavier paint is going to have tons of bracing, have to be super thick, and it just, it's anybody's guess. If you don't like painting on a little bit of kind of lumps and bumps and irregularities, because that's one of the beauties of linen, but if you're like really like everything to be even and can't like your shoes to be right next to the bed and everything matches up, and you really have some OCD about irregular textures, probably cotton is going to be more for you. Okay. It's really personal preference. I have favorites in both. I still use, even though I work here and I could do all oil primed if I wanted, all oil primed all on linen all the time, there are some really nice things about some of the cotton, and I'll tell you what ones I really like and use, that are reasons why I would use that. Okay, and I work in oil and acrylic, so there's one that I'm going to prefer over the other, and it's not just because one's oil primed and one's acrylic primed, because I use, both mediums on both. So it really comes down to, especially now that we used to have it where you always had to buy boxes of canvas, right? It was three canvases in a pack, maybe 4, right? Now almost everything, isn't it, Amanda? Almost everything you can buy a single one. Unless it's like Paramount where you're buying a bulk box, or Practica, you can get either 1 or 2 together. So for a much lower price, you can try a lot of different things. So, I mean, that's a really good way of giving yourself some kind of playing around on some surfaces to see what they do for you. All right. So let's start with more value line canvas, and we'll work all the way up to the crazy contraption here. Because for every artist and every skill level, there's something that's there for you. If you're just doing this for fun, you're retired, you're teaching grandchildren, or just for practice. I don't pull out an oil primed linen. I'm like, my pretty, with something that's very, treasured and coveted when I'm just playing around, or I'm doing color studies. I just want something that still will look nice if I need to keep it around to look at, but that's very inexpensive. I don't want to paint on cardboard because obviously that's not going to be good, but at least a lower end canvas, I could always take it off and stretch it on something else, right? Because it's at least canvas. So if you're just really starting out, something like Creative Inspirations are going to be good. They come in different packs. They have, what is it? Is it 5 packs? I think all of them are 5 packs. So you get, when we talked about things being backstapled, so if you do need to re-stretch it, those can be popped off. You can pull it around kind of on another canvas. They're 11-ounce double primed, so it's not like the super cheap, super paper thin, more kind of craft store canvases. It's a 5/8 inch profile. It's pine. I mean, even for these being our value line, there's no knots in any of those stretchers. So, I mean, it's really a nice surface for painting. So it's got a nice even mechanical grain. It's not too slick and it's not too dry. Yes, Frida.
Are all of the canvas?
Where you really get into more issues because some panels, they're turned, it might be canvas, but it might be on a cardboard. With these, it's solid wood. It's canvas that is going to be acid free. It's primed to be able to accept. All these can accept, unless they're oil primed, whatever surface that you want. Okay, so this just isn't, you don't want to paint the Mona Lisa on this and expect that this is going to be in fantastic shape down the road. They would want to put it on a little heavier duty stretchers. You know, if you're a really rough painter, this could potentially, you know, if you're just too rough, give you a little bit of ghosting perhaps, because although it's got a pretty substantial bead for a value canvas, but you know, it can be slack over time. And once it's painted on, it's harder to shrink that back. They don't come with the stretcher keys because that's something that again is added cost. So you couldn't key this back up unless you make keys of your own, or you've got some other keys sitting around from other canvases that you could use. But what this gives you is 5 archival surfaces for practice that are still thin enough where you can store a pretty good amount of them, right? Or if something turns out nice, you can even frame it and go from there. So it's a great way of buying multiple surfaces for very little money and having, you know, a lot of fun painting. So, I mean, this would even be really fancy for kids to start on, or like a retirement home or whatever. It's like the paint and sip style because you're buying it in bulk, but these are better quality than you're going to have for something like paint and sip. Okay. So I'm going to set these stuff under here so we've got a little bit more room. All right, so then kind of the next step up from there is Practica. Practica has a black and Practica has a white, and those come in 2 packs. Okay, it's acid-free acrylic priming. You can do oils, acrylics, whatever. 5/8 inch deep. It's got just a little bit nicer texture, and the black is kind of nice because that takes a lot of paint to do that yourself if you want to do something dark and really make it stand out. Wood stretchers, nice wood stretchers. It's stapled in the back, so this could be re-stretched, and it's got a nice decent turned corner, so that's something that gives you that little bit of kind of the next level up. How many ounces is this? Let me see. It's a 10-ounce primed weight. So, and it's got a nice tight stretch to it. So this is a great economy canvas, but again, a step up that gives you something that's a little bit more kind of the next level. Okay, yes, Frida.
What about using palette knives? Susan Zimmerman would like to know if there are any issues with that. Should you stick with a heavier weight canvas? Should you use a linen canvas versus cotton? Is it all in the application?
It's a number of those different things. She's asking about using palette knives. The biggest problem with those is learning the application, and that's something that's good to do with just some cheap paint and some practice. Oil's great because you can scrape it back up and lay it down again, okay, just to get used to that application. Something that you want to consider is palette knife painting puts on a much heavier amount of paint than just regular brush painting generally. So you don't want to be putting something like that that's heavy on a larger, and the reason that like the Practica and stuff like that don't come in really huge sizes is it's a lighter weight cotton, which is perfect for, smaller size canvases. You don't want to get up into 24 by 36 with only a 10-ounce primed weight. Okay, so that's why they don't go up that high, which is not how it is at places that sell, really low level economy canvas, because that's not their point is to give you the sizes you want, not necessarily the quality that you need. Okay, so anytime you're working on something that's got that heavier weight like palette knives, you want either a heavier cotton canvas, or you want to start potentially at linen, or go with something like panels. Okay, because that's harder, it's durable, it's going to be much stronger for holding up to heavier weight. Yes, Amanda?
Does Practica come with the keys?
It does not come with the keys, because we're still kind of at that practice level that could still be used for, because the bad thing about stuff like, and I've done it on cardboard panels. Remember the one we cut apart, Katie? I painted this great portrait that I just loved, and it's under the first 10 episodes we did on panels. Mm-hmm. To prove the point, I used a jigsaw and cut it apart to say that, look, this is cardboard. This is what the quality is going to be like over time. This is how archival it is. This is what the value of this is. So with something like this, you can keep these and do something. If you paint a great study that's just absolutely beautiful and you want to keep it around, you're fine with this, because this is archival. But it's not like the, going to exhibit at, your local museum group or things like that. Every product that we're showing has a place. And what you just need to evaluate is, what is the place that you're at? What is the place that you're at for your, practice works? What is the place that you're at for your full scale works? Are you selling work? Are you trying to sell work? So you obviously don't want to paint a masterpiece on something that's falling apart and try to present it to a client for $1,000, right? Okay. Oh, the magic shelf. All right, so we're moving on to the edge. Okay, so we're going up in our heavyweight canvases. And I think I've got Paramount under it. So, well, we've got a hybrid. Let's talk about the hybrid, because, people have seen it. Yes, we do have a canvas that bends the rules, okay? And before we start getting into the heavier cottons, and this is one of the heavier cottons, we talked about the priming. We said either for acrylic or oil, right? We've got a canvas that's called, yes, it's an all media artist canvas. And by saying all media, we mean all media. And if you saw any of the social media posts that they did where there's the canvas and there's the scribble, yes, that was this. You can use watercolor on it. You can use inks on it. You can use anything that's a wet media, and it shines for that, okay? But then it can still be displayed like a regular canvas in a frame without glass and things like that you've got to do with watercolor paper, because this is a different type of surface. So it's a very carefully constructed proprietary formula that's different than traditional gesso, but yet it's on a regular stretched canvas. So that gives you some other alternatives that some of these, other ones, you're gonna really have to stick to more of an easel medium. So, and they've got a 0.75 inch and a 1.5 inch, where you would not even have to use a frame for that. You could just paint those edges.
Somebody was asking about pastel on canvas earlier, and
That's the one.
Pastel, well, you can, no, but we've used them on the Protone panels with pastels. Anything that's got, this has an absorbent, it's got some texture to it, but it's also an absorbent surface, which with pastels, even though they're a powder, they still absorb into stuff, okay? So this works really well with that, but I have seen people use pastels. The senso, the way that this priming is on this natural looking linen, it's acrylic, but it's a different style clear priming, and it's got that little bit of tack that pastels really work really nicely with. So you don't have to stick to the regular thing. Now, what you're gonna have to worry about with pastels, and oil pastel will work on all these, even the oil primed, but with regular pastels, you are gonna have to worry about probably framing it under glass, just because the powder will kick with the wind or breath or anything else, or come off the wall over time, and you don't want pigments floating about and getting dusted off. So that would be the one drawback, is that you'd want to work on a thinner canvas, and then frame that with spacers to protect
like
your
pastels,
environment
yeah.
and your artwork.
Just like you would do with pastels on
Yes.
paper.
But it is possible. So so that is the Yes canvas. That gives you some other things. And remember when we talked about the splined, kind of the tuck and roll style? Katie, can you do the overhead? You can see where they've mitered this channel out. It's turned, it's stapled, and it's pushed right in there. Look how pretty and clean that is. So that's the one thing about the back stapled with the gallery wrap that I don't like as much, even though it's tight and it's stapled down really nice. This you can paint right around to that edge, because I'm kind of just that weirdo that likes even the back to look pretty. This is why I like the back splined with a cotton canvas, is just, it's really nice and really neat and clean. Now, what is the big drawback on this? And I'm going to step forward and say I've never had one that failed or needed to be restretched. So I've got paintings out there from 20 plus years, in having actually used the edge long before I worked here, that are just fine, that have never had to be restretched. So the likelihood that this would ever even happen is irrelevant. But if you do have to restretch this, there's no extra coming down over the stretcher bar. You would have to stretch that on probably a little bit smaller, shallower stretcher strip, so that you could then back staple it. Yes, Frida.
Several times in the episode you have mentioned archival versus museum quality. Can you just give it?
It's the same thing. It's what I'm talking, and I'm sorry, that was probably very confusing. I didn't mean to make it sound like that. All of these that we're looking at are archival, okay, meaning that it's acid-free primers. The cotton doesn't have acid in it. When we're talking museum quality, we're talking about, there's differences in wood, which we'll talk about with some of these. There's differences in, like, this thing is built to withstand the apocalypse. You would be stapling it just on the wood itself, but all of this can actually be taken apart. The painting can be taken off. It can be put in a shipping tube and sent across the country and then put back together. So if you're at a level where you're showing all over the place, stuff like this is in your best interest, because that's going to save you ridiculous amounts of shipping costs, instead of, containerizing these in crates where people are going to have to take them apart, where things can get damaged, where the freight costs are exceptionally high because of how large the sizing is. And this can be tweaked and torqued and moved all around if it does start getting slack, just with some basic tools. So it gives you completely different options over just that traditional wood frame. This obviously isn't something that you're going to use to teach your kids to paint. This may be something that none of us ever get to the point where we use these, but this is something where if you're at that level, this is, you don't want to be painting on a Practica, right? Okay. So the edge is, and we've got a, there's a big one back behind me. So you've got the 11/16 in this, the 1.5 and the 2.5. Those have that spline that we talked about, the same as the, you can see really the thickness difference. And obviously this is the thinner one, so I don't have to bring the other one out. Easy to frame. That's something to consider when you're buying canvases. The thin ones aren't as cool, and you can't just display them without a frame, but you can fit this in any frame for the most part, unless it's a little tiny metal track frame. These, if you enter a show and you've got these and they're nice and clean and they're painted and they're wired in the back, they may still require a frame, and then suddenly you have a 2.5 inch deep canvas that you're trying to get a frame for. So it's always good to know the types of places that you may exhibit, to kind of, obviously a 1.5 inch would be a nice in between. There are floater frames for a 1.5 inch. So those are things to consider as well. This is a 14 ounce primed weight. So we talked about the other ones being like 10 and 11 ounces. This is 14 ounce. It's heavy duty. These, stretchers are super heavy duty. Can you show in here where you can see how does it? Oh, up to the side. Perfect. Okay. See how deep this goes, where that bead is? So that's just right on that edge. These are super heavy duty. This is not, even a large one is not going to bend or warp or twist, because that's just like super crazy deep. So if you are painting really heavy materials with this, if you are a really rough painter on your surfaces, this is a much heavier primed weight, with cotton, with sizable stretchers that are going to keep this from bending and bowing and moving around under pressure on your easel. This is one of the canvases that for commissions I love, because again, super clean, pretty back, sides can be painted. It just presents so nicely. It's and it's a little bit drier gesso, but I really like how it takes, especially acrylics. It just takes that so beautifully. And it's the weave, although it's mechanized, is like this just really beautiful feeling when you paint on it for cotton canvas. So the Edge and Paramount are my two huge favorites for acrylic canvases. Sounds like there's a helicopter.
Right over us. Very good.
You never know. Maybe it's a jailbreak. No. Then Paramount is kind of our next step up from there in the cotton canvases. It's universal primed cotton, 12 ounce weight, so it's slightly less than the Edge for just the regular 11/16 inch. It's triple primed, so it's got that really nice, pretty white surface. It's got a medium tooth that's just a little bit more tooth than kind of like from thinner jeans to a little thicker jeans, I think, with the Paramount is kind of how I envision it in my head trying to explain it to someone. Back stapled, so if you do ever need to restretch it, you can. It's got the keys, Amanda, not giblets. Although we were
did it.
first, I know, I did. Keys on there. So, and then with the heavier, thicker depth, the 1.5, or this is actually 1 1/16, 1 1/13, 16th. So it's almost 2 inches. This is 15 ounce primed weight. So this is our kind of Mac Daddy of the cotton canvases. Double priming on it. Same kind of tooth as on this, but just that little bit heavier weight. Back stapled, and look at the stretcher on this. I'm going to put this to the side so you can see. It's got like double bracing. So besides that, it's got a bead and then it comes down. This, for a super big canvas, is going to be super duper strong. These are just, I mean, this feels like it's not indestructible, but it feels pretty indestructible as far as stretchers.
Now that you have the canvas with the keys, can you just go over what they do one more time?
Yes, all you're doing with these is if this would get slack, which for either the Edge or Paramount, I've never had one go slack for cotton canvas, which is incredible because I have at one point had a non-climate controlled studio in North Carolina, which is a little bit like a swamp. You put them, can you see this with that, Katie? See how that's put in there? Now there's different schools on which is supposed to go, whether this kind of angle is supposed to go this way or whether it's supposed to go this way. As long as they're working in tandem with each other, I don't really care. I think probably I tend to put them like this so it's a little bit easier to hammer in. Okay, and if you're not great with a hammer, find a friend that is, because it's real easy to, if you've got your painting like already on here, and you know, I've had a few friends that were kind of clumsy that actually damaged it. So you want to take, if you've ever seen a trim hammer, it gives you enough force, but it's not a crazy huge head. you would just tap those in gently. Put it in all four corners, put all of those keys in first, and you tap them in gently. And what that does is pushes that wood apart just a slight little bit there. It pushes and drives this a little higher. It pushes this and drives that one a little higher. The corners still hold it, but it's just, if it's gotten slack and the wood, you know, it's dry. It's always when it's drier that this stuff gets slack, right? So like if you live in Arizona, you probably use keys. You're going to push those in, and then it's going to just push that, just that little bit apart, and it makes that drum tight again, okay? So those, the Edge and the Paramount Pro are your nice heavy-duty cotton canvases. Okay. So now let's talk about senso. So here's when we start going into linen, and this is the easiest way to see kind of linen in the raw before it's primed. If you can, sorry, switch to the, I didn't tip you off.
I thought you were just holding it up.
Yeah, you can see kind of that irregularity of the weave, where some little bits are, the thread's a little wider than others. It gives just this really nice texture. Is it easier to do it that way? Oh yeah, perfect. Okay, so it just gives this really nice irregular texture. The beauty of this is, even though it's clear acrylic primed, if you want something to look really natural, you can do the painting and leave parts of this kind of unfinished, and it's really nice. And because it's gessoed, you can varnish right over it, and it's perfectly fine. Those are back stapled, so it's got that, you know, handy back stapling. It's got keys. You can restretch this. It just gives you a very different way of, with an acrylic primer, so you can do acrylics or oils on it, of having something. And I think on the episode where we did that priming the surfaces, we actually took one of these and showed how you could put, with some clear gesso, you could actually tint this, but still kind of have the texture show through to give it a ground to then paint on. So just kind of a neat little difference where it's kind of starting into the linen prices, but able to work with multiple mediums. Okay, and the weight on that is, let's see, what's it say? I apparently don't have to weight on that. It's linen, so it doesn't have to be as heavy. And it's actually a pretty sizable linen. I would bet with the priming it's probably maybe a 10 ounce. So, because linen's so much stronger, it doesn't have to be, like when you're talking a 15 ounce cotton canvas that's super heavy duty, you can have like an 8 ounce linen and it's going to be about the same durability for weight. Okay, so then a nice line for working with linen but being able to get the universal priming or the oil priming is the Centurion. And it's funny because we've got gram weight on this, which I don't know why, because I don't know the difference in the gram weight. It's a heavier linen. The LX is the acrylic priming, so it's universal. Staple-free edges, so you can still paint the sides if you don't want to frame it. Backstretched, it's got keys. It's a really, really nice acrylic priming that it's just absorbent enough, but it's not too absorbent where oils will sit better on this. For as far as as acrylic primings with oils go, this actually works pretty darn nice. And with the ability to have that linen, it's going to resist, you know, if you've got humidity problems in your state and you know that your studio, you've had canvases that have had mold and mildew on the back of them, you're not going to have the issues with these. So you can have your heavier weight stretcher with the Centurion, but have kind of that ability for all the nice hallmarks that the linen is. I know those are sold in singles now. They didn't used to be, so that's really awesome. Yes,
Do you
Frida.
need to store canvas cotton versus linen canvas any differently?
No, it's
Should
just going to be you want them to be standing on end so that you're not going to get, and you want it to not be like leaning, or especially if the larger the canvas is, you want it straight up and down, so that you don't have flexing and bowing. And for the love of Pete, if you're storing canvases and you've got a bunch of them together, don't do this, because that can press against the staples face to face without the labels, or keep them in the wrapping, but face to face keeps it so those beads are against each other, and store canvases of the same size together. If you're in the Jerry's Live Facebook group tonight, I'll post the one cubby that I've got small canvases in, and I've got linen and cotton canvases, and some I've put grounds on when I've been in a like not willing to paint and wanting to paint, but I know I need to be doing something. I've got colored grounds on some of them. If you've got a bigger one, don't put it where it's coming over that, because this could push on it and put a big dent in it, okay? Always have, you know, this is 11 by 14. This could go against this because it's got those wide stretchers. So it's going to protect it from rubbing against each other, but notice that the face isn't there. So I would need to have the same width, a 12 by 12 against this, or a 12 by 16 with the extra up here, but you want those to match up that are pressing against each other. Does that make sense? Because that is the worst thing you can ever have happen, is invest in a bunch of this stuff and store it wrong, and when you take it out, especially with linen, have dents that you are not going to get out of it unless you try to restretch it, which even then can be really tricky. The Centurion has a wonderful texture, and with the oil priming, it's got that same texture, but with oil priming where the paint sits up on it real nice. It's nice and kind of vibrant. If you can see from here to here, this is a little bit less bright white. This is something that if you buy oil primed canvases, you need to be aware of, because you've got linseed oil in that when they do the oil priming. If something's been stored in a carton, or even at your house, in your studio, in a closet for long periods of time, the linseed oil will yellow a little bit. What you do, take it out, set it out for a couple days in like a sunny window or something like that. This will lighten back up. These came out of a box, so, and this is actually lightened some compared to what it was when I unpacked them yesterday. So that's something that people will be very upset. This is, or they buy a roll of linen. They finally splurge and buy a roll of oil primed linen, and it looks cream colored. It's because it's been rolled in a container for who knows how long before you purchased it. So this will lighten up if you happen to buy some and you get them and they're kind of yellowy. That will help them get that brighter color. So that is the kind of the linen that we've got that has this beautiful texture, but you can get it in those multiple primed surfaces. Another great brand that has that same thing is the Paris canvases. And if you look at these, Katie, if you can do the overhead with those, you can get the oil and acrylic primed. It's back stapled, but it has these beautiful kind of copper tacks. So it gives you that more old world look of the old traditional canvases. And it creates a nice tight surface, but it's pulled back here so that it gives you that extra security, because otherwise these can curl and stuff like that if you depend solely on those tacks. The stretchers on these are, I'm trying to look ahead and see where I've got this. I want to say that these are spruce. So you're not going to get as much kind of expansion and contraction in it. And then they build these in a really unique way. Can you see that from above, Katie? Where instead of those traditional corners, it's actually built like this. So when it's pushed apart, it does it a little bit differently. Keeps nicer, tighter corners than the old traditional kind of, or not traditional, but the modern V that we have. This is more the old traditional type of corner with these. all triple primed, whether it's the oil or acrylic. It has this beautiful pronounced texture on it, if you can see it from above. This is the acrylic, and we'll show the oil. But it's just a really, really nice. The weight is 10.3 ounces on this before the priming, I believe. Can you see it?
Yeah, close I can get.
It's hard to see,
It's
isn't
hard
it?
to see, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's because it's just so.
You can kind of tell, like,
It's
on
very
the edges
white.
where it rolls over, like,
Yes.
nice and...
Yeah, it's just gorgeous stuff. And then the oil primed is just even, I mean, has that, but has just that little bit of, and I'm rubbing the canvas. And remember I said how you need the isopropyl alcohol. There's a reason I do this on my canvases, because I will enjoy feeling them. It's a very tactile experience with linen especially, but especially these nicer canvases. You can just feel the quality. Something like this is, when I was talking about more of a museum style piece, you understand looking at this, that the construction is very different. This is designed to be something that, you know, I really love to take that. I wish I had thought to do it, but I don't remember what it's backed with. The painting in my office that's from my great grandfather that was done in 1920. It is super heavy. Part of it is because it's got a real plaster and wood, real gilded frame, but the rest of it is that it's these super heavy, thick stretchers like this. And it's still a really nice, tight, oil primed linen. So, that's the Paris. Now, something that we carry that I think is being discontinued, I don't remember if it was because of the linen or not, but it's still available. So if you are already where you really enjoy linen and you haven't tried the Odessa, I really urge you to try it, because this is one of my favorite linens as far as if you like texture. They come in acrylic and heavy primed. They have a finer tooth linen. They have a super knobby kind of heavier tooth linen, but I just brought in the medium body, but you should be able to see that with the overhead with these. One's acrylic primed and one's oil primed. And again, the oil priming is darker because it's been in a box. But oh, look how you can see that texture on the oil primed one. You can feel the texture. Listen. It's just got such a great texture to it. Nice or heavy duty stretchers, keys. They stretch these before they prime them, which is incredibly unusual for linen primed canvas. Usually the linen's already all done and then they cut the pieces and stretch it. So super, super duper drum tight already to start with, because they put that, especially for the acrylic, as that dries, that tightens on there. Same for the oil. So you get these like beautiful drum tight linens with just incredible texture. And they are Amy's, like, these people are my spirit animals, and look how many staples they put in this thing. That's what the back of when I stretch stuff, it looks like. And the first time I saw it, I was like, look at that, it's overkill, I love them. So if you're in the mood to try something really fun and unique, the Odessa is a fantastic linen. Then we've got, where did I put this back here? Oh, I have a large extra bowl back here that was just in the studio. I just want them to understand, because when you buy linen on, you know, you're buying it by the roll and you're not sure what it looks like. Look at what the difference of this is with the super large extra bold.
I don't know if we can...
Is it not going to zoom into it?
How close I can get, we should see. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, look at that.
There you go.
That's some crazy big texture. But this has been over here for I don't even know how long. Still drum tight. Where it's been sitting in here, which this place is pretty humid. So, alright. So the last beast is the Museo frames. And it's that aluminum frame, but it's Belgian linen that comes from Clausen's. So you've got, I think oil primed is how they do all of them. this is what I'm talking about. And it's just for the extrapolation of when I'm saying super high-end museum quality. This thing is not going to bend or torque. I can't do anything with this, even with being smaller and having a little bit of ability to pull on it. It can be adjusted. They all come with their own hardware for adjusting all of that, so you don't have to buy that separate. It's already pre-stretched. It's stapled on the back. Nice, clean corners on them. So this is when you're taking that to the absolute top echelon level, okay? These can get pretty large before they need a brace in it because of this aluminum and how durable it is. And again, super easy to adjust for any type of atmospheric condition in your studio, in a gallery, anywhere. So, and again, that could be taken off. These can be disassembled. The tool can be put in a tube with the stretchers, roll that canvas, put it in another tube, and that's all you're having to pay for shipping. So, and again, guys, we are all at different levels. Whether we're a lifelong student, which that's where I'm putting myself as. I hope to always be learning. But whether we're doing stuff or we're sending it across country, whether we're just starting out, whether we just want to do paint and sip and enjoy our retirement, nothing is wrong with that. This is the beauty of all of these offerings in canvas styles, because there's something that's appropriate for every one of you. That doesn't mean that you can't play a little here and there and try something new, but it's a really good kind of, hopefully this is giving you great definition of when you buy these individual styles, what that is getting you, what value that is getting you for the hard-earned money that you spend. Because none of us wants to buy something and then get something completely different than what we thought was coming. Especially when you can't be there to buy stuff, right? So, are there any last questions, ladies, that over any of the things that we've talked about?
Mary was wondering how important it is to seal the back of the canvas.
You do not want to do anything to the back of the canvas. Never ever, because what's going to happen, especially if it's cotton and you seal the back of the canvas, you've just lost your ability to be able to tighten it up. Where you do want to seal the back of something is if you're working with wood panels, okay, because you don't want any of that expansion and contraction. You want to seal it so that it's as airtight as possible, which that episode that we talked about where we're doing substrate preparation, that's what you want to refer back to. These things are ready to go as is. You don't want to seal the back. And especially with the oil prime canvas, this is where these breathe, is out the back. So you do not want to, and all mediums, whether it's acrylic, whether it's oils, whatever, because this is fabric, there's always going to be a little bit of off-gassing out the back to dry. It could keep your painting from cracking. So you definitely do not want to put anything on the back of that. The only time you should be sealing both sides of fabric is if you're making like a flag that you want to display somewhere, you know, so that it's even on both sides. That's not for painting on stretched surfaces, if that makes any sense. But that's a good question, because there's some people that think you do need to do it. You definitely don't. You guys have a great week, and we will see you later on. Take care.